You're listening to Beyond Technique, the podcast that empowers photographers to bring their businesses to the next level. Hello and welcome to Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platypod, Photofocus, and Cohen University. This is Shamira Young, and I'm joined by my co-host and an endangered species of the photography industry, Cohen.
If you really think about it, that's really scary that I have been around so long now that I fall into that category. But one thing that doesn't make me endangered is how much I love this industry. So, and that's what we all share in common these days. Shamira, I want to say something about the Platypod Blog because you've been managing it now for, it's a good 10 months or more.
It's been a while.
And seriously, you are finding so much great content out there. I know when we started working with the Platypod team, they were doing, 3-4 posts a month. And now we do 2 every week, and they're winding up with 8 to 10 blog posts. But what's really cool is all the different techniques and kinds of images that you're finding where people are using platypods.
Yeah, I can't even take credit for the blog. I mean, it's the work that these photographers are doing is amazing, and it speaks for itself. I mean, just to highlight a couple of them. And folks, if you haven't checked out the blog, head over to platypod.com/blog, or just go to platypod.com and click on blog at the top menu, and you'll see some amazing examples and inspiration of what photographers are creating using their platypods and accessories. I mean, one of my favorite, Skip, is with photographer Hilmar Smith, where it's titled An Epic Game of Monopoly. And it's a fun project she did at home. A lot of us are at home with the pandemic, where she composited herself and her children onto a giant Monopoly board. Or rather, she shrunk all of them down. And it's just the coolest thing. Do you, Skip, have anything that stands out to you from the blog?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I get a kick out of everything Hilmar shares, but also one of my favorites has become the self-portraits, and I hope I'm pronouncing Don's name right, Don Curry, or Curry, and the Ewok self-portraits.
Yes.
And loving the whole Star Wars series the way I do. It was just so much fun, but I think the fun thing about this, and we say this all the time, and Platypod has been saying it for a long time, Platypod changes your perspective. And there's so many products out there that can help you do that, tying in Platypod together, whether it's the Max Macro Bundle or the Ultra Essentials Kit, but they're all giving you an opportunity to take a different perspective and add to the creativity, which right now we all need in the middle of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. It really takes your work up a notch, and you can have fun wherever you are, be it at home with your family, out in the park with your kids. I mean, it allows you, like you said, Skip, to capture dynamic angles and bring your work up a notch. It's very cool.
Hey, let's get to today's interview. When you and I started Beyond Techniques, Shamira, it was based on this idea we had. We wanted to go beyond the skills that it takes to run a business or capture an image. So today's guest is the epitome of the kind of information we hoped we'd be able to share with our listeners. Moose Peterson is in the house. He's a photographer, writer, educator, producer, but most important of all, at least to me, he's a fighter to protect our wildlife heritage. And there's a line from his mission statement on his website that I want to read. Quote, "The goal of our work is to preserve our wild heritage. In reaching this goal, we work towards educating the public as well as other photographers," close quote. And that's what I love about Moose's work. Here's another aspect to today's interview that's kind of fun. Moose and I share a lot of mutual friends, but we had never met until Photoshop World a year or so ago. Now, finally meeting and talking at the show is another example why I always remind all of you, attend as many conferences as you can. And it doesn't matter whether they're live or online. The point is that every time you go to a conference, you build your network a little bit and you expand your set. So we're going to talk about how Moose uses his skills as an artist to educate and enlighten photographers and the public into one of our greatest assets, protecting the wildlife around us. So Moose, this is going to be the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Beyond Technique.
Well, let me tell you, I was having a hard time not cutting in during that intro to mention a few quips. But thanks for having me here very much. I appreciate it.
Well, feel free to quip away after, post-interview.
Well, now that I've got permission to move my lips, believe me, I will.
That's a deal.
Moose, we are so thrilled to have you. I mean, you talk about a photographer on a mission. Your work is stunning. What you stand for is so awesome. And we're just so pumped to have you on the show. And we want to kick it off with our favorite first question. Tell us about your background and how you developed your passion for photography, how you got where you are today.
Well, especially in this day and age, it's hard for people to realize, but my being where I am today is just the greatest chain of happy serendipity that you can imagine. It wasn't like one day I just said, I'm going to be a photographer, and that's what I set out to do. I was very fortunate to have parents who took me out. I didn't spend any time inside, which is why four walls and I never get along. I was in the Sierra as a kid. My dad and I would do about 500 miles a year backpacking, and it was just the cavalcade of things. My sister, a very gifted commercial artist, so I learned color and stuff from her. My dad was into light, so the home was lit. So all those things were just part of growing up. And then when I was just about third grade, 9 years old or so, 10 years old, my cousin, a real brilliant guy, just got his Nikon F and a 200 F4, and he put it in my hands, and everything just kept going from there. And I wish I could take credit for the whole thing, but I can't. It was just the way life unfolded, and I'm very fortunate and blessed because it keeps doing that for me even today.
It's funny how many of us in this industry started in this industry before we knew we'd even started. And it's that influence. I mean, I fell in love with imaging. I am not a photographer, and everybody knows that. My passion is the business of marketing. But up until a few years ago when he passed away, I was still in touch with my high school photo teacher, who was just great. If it hadn't been for Mr. Stanley, creating that interest, and then it was just grab shots around the high school and things that went into the yearbook and the school newspaper. But there's so many of us that need to take a look back at those people that influenced us and gave us that gift of excitement to follow it as a career. So that's good stuff.
Well, I had the same thing. Mr. Traub was my high school photo teacher, and as a kid, I thought he was kind of gruff and brutal, and definitely was way too much to the point for my taste back then. But his lessons that he pushed on us and taught us back then, I still use today. So it's amazing how sometimes it just takes one sentence from the right person to set you on a path or on a journey that you had no idea until 10 years later, what it was all started.
Well, thank you, Mr. Traub.
Yes, I say that a lot.
Let's switch gears and let's get right into the whole issue of endangered species, because that's been a real focal point for you over the years. What are some of the biggest issues that you're finding that people are just either stupid about or don't understand in terms of trying to protect so many different endangered species? And are there some fun stories that have come up in the process for you over the years?
Well, Anybody who deals with the public knows the basic issues. But the biggest one is the fact that understanding how something that does not put money in your pocket or that you don't see ever can have an impact on you, and more importantly, those that come beyond us. You know, one of my favorite quotes goes back to Keith Wacklet, who said decades ago, he was in Yosemite. He's a great photographer, and he worked there. And he said, you know, if John Muir didn't have the foresight to protect Yosemite, we wouldn't have it today. The question is, do we have the foresight to protect what we have now for next generation? And that really cuts right to the quick of the whole thing. You know, it's no different than, as far as I'm concerned, wearing a mask today. You know, we wear a mask to protect the guy or the gal or the public we're with. It's not our protection. It's we're thinking of someone else. And I don't think there's any difference in our approach to our wild heritage. We were very fortunate to be left that. We're very fortunate to be able to enjoy it. And I think it's our responsibility to be good stewards to pass it on to the next citizen of the planet, to be able to, if they want to, go out and enjoy it and view it and cherish it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that term, wild heritage. I think in our digital age and in just everyone with our cell phones and our TVs that get bigger and bigger and smarter and just all of our technology, it's easy to lose that sense of our wild heritage. And it's so great that you stand for that and that you protect that moose. And I'm curious, so how do you get the word out about your work? And how do you raise awareness and do it in such a way where people really connect with your mission?
So you're asking kind of a for lack of better terms, a two-sided question. Because one side is education and one side is business, and they don't necessarily, the vast majority of the time, come together as one unit. For example, my library, and it's important for people to understand that I've been doing this for over 40 years. And we started off by a short story, putting ourselves in a lot of debt to go out and photograph critters that we knew were going to disappear. You know, we have 7 extinct species in my files. You know, that you can't see them. Their photographs are in my files. So bringing the clock forward, because this is, back in the late 70s, early 80s, we're doing this. Today, those photographs are now, for lack of better terms, and depressingly, are history. So when someone needs photographs of, the weevil or the kangaroo rat and some of the other things I have in my files, we put it out there and we don't charge for those uses. The majority of them are quote unquote scientific, where you have researchers, biologists, whatever, doing papers or presentations. And so we aren't directly interfacing with the public. These people who are much smarter than I am when it comes to the whole process are using my photographs. We don't put a price tag on that because it belongs to everybody. And that's something that, we learned back in the days with critters and then carried on with our aviation work. So today's work, and, that fact that we basically gave away, it's hard for photographers to understand that, there's only one thing on the planet I'm the best at. No one else is better than that. And that's sitting somewhere for 12 hours staring at a hole in the ground waiting for a critter to show up. I'm the best at that. There's no one better. But no one's paying me, and no photograph is going to pay me to sit there for 12 hours. That's dead time. But I've done that my entire career. I sit and I wait to get the photograph. And that process then makes you hungry for the other side. You have to be able to pay bills. You can't. I mean, I say to my wife Sharon, who's been my partner and colleague and wife for over 40 years, that I just want to take pictures, but I have to do the business side. I have to make an income so I can go back out and spend time behind the camera, because the only time I know I'm making money is when I'm behind that camera. It's a two-edged sword, and it goes back continually back and forth. And we have been, in a nutshell, pretty successful in making that all work, raising 2 boys, sending them to college, doing all we need to in the process.
All right, so Moose, in terms of getting the word out, and especially now where the social media world is getting so crowded because everybody is out there with little to do and downtime in the pandemic, what are you finding are some of the ways that are most effective? Because I know you're on Instagram, you've got your blog, there are things going on Facebook. What seems to be the method for madness in terms of really getting the word out on when you're trying to make a point on virtually anything in that wildlife heritage?
Well, we have to take a step back. Our original website went live back in '94. So back when there was none of this WordPress stuff. You would go to the Notebook app on Windows. You would do all the tagging and stuff, and then you would paste it and go. So I've had and I'm very fortunate, and I count my blessings every day for those folks, a lot of them who have been with me since then. It's almost 30 years, these people. So I know them, there's a relationship, and that group have come to basically trust that what I've done, and that trust comes from the fact that they've tried the different things I've mentioned, technique, gear, whatever, and they found that I was being sincere. So I built that credibility. So while my numbers, when you look at, I only have 15,000 people like on my YouTube channel, and I don't know, 15,000 on Facebook, and I think Twitter's down to like 68,000. While my numbers there are low, every one of those folks does something. They are actionable. They react. So I have really quality followers who are very passionate, very intelligent. They look at both sides of the coin, and then they make their choices and their decisions and act on that. So that makes a difference, and it's that actionable followers that I really work hard to keep informed so they can do what they think is right. When it comes to critters and endangered critters in our wild heritage, the biggest action I ask of all of them, of anybody, is simply share their photographs. It's real easy to say words, but a photograph, the old "it's worth 1,000 words" sentiment to it, that well-done photograph can move mountains faster and more efficiently than volumes of text. So Sharon and I, after a number of, I guess you could say, disappointments, trying to go the conventional way of making a difference in our environment. Back in the 80s in California, it was a huge push to get kids involved in the environment, thinking, okay, that we'll get them involved and they'll be the next generation and they'll make up for all the mistakes of us adults. And that didn't work. It doesn't work for so many reasons. That we don't have crystal balls. We don't know what's going to happen when they get older. No one, for example, would have known about this pandemic. So the photograph, it lasts forever. And with that army of photographers out there, which is why we have given away all of the techniques I've ever come up with, that volume of photographs out there that will stir the soul and make people get involved with just that single click. No words are involved if it's done correctly. Does that make sense to your social engagement question?
Totally. Because there is a point that, and I learned this myself early on in Twitter when I went out and I don't know, I got an email blast from some company wanting to build my followers. I spent a few bucks and got 5,000 followers. That turned out to be absolutely horrible. And 2 years later, I had managed to delete every single one of them. Because if you build it, if you're giving out good organic content and you build organically, that old line about if you build it, they will come is absolutely true. And I think people tend to forget that, especially these days when I see somebody say, well, here's what I've got over on Pinterest or Instagram or Google+. It's the quality of your audience that absolutely makes a difference. Because if they're good, they're all influencers themselves, and they're all aspiring to relate to the things that you're sharing as an artist. And all of that makes total sense. In fact, there's a great line that Scott Bourne gave me years ago that if you live by the numbers, you'll die by the numbers. And I always thought that was kind of a lazy excuse for people that don't want to give you any of their analytics. The truth is, it really is appropriate. So if you're building good organic content and you're building that following, good content is absolutely king.
Well, people have to understand I'm old-fashioned. I started off with that stuff called film. And long before there was even, a fax machine, let alone email, and a lot of that old school stuff, I still think rules better in this day and age. Sharon and I, we've had lots and lots of clients over the decades, and we've always wanted to have long-term clients, not one-time clients, and that same philosophy goes through all that we do under the umbrella called social media.
I have repeatedly said over the years that I wish there was a way that before anybody was allowed to buy a high-end DSLR, they'd be forced to shoot a case of chrome and understand exposure and composition, because shooting film and that foundation, especially chrome, was unforgiving. You could not, you couldn't blame it on the lab. You couldn't get the lab to clean it up. And if you exposed for the wrong thing in the image, then that's what you got. And like I said, I wish there was a way that everybody, before they were allowed to use their DSLR, had to learn to shoot a case of chrome with, great exposures.
I actually would take that one step further, and they'd have to shoot that brick of film and deliver it to a photo buyer. It's, there's so many lessons I learned, and I still learn from all those editors I work with, which is why I've always stuck in the editorial world. It's people who buy photographs to get out their story, their message, are just incredible pearls of wisdom. And to send in a slide in a cardboard mount, and that is that's everything. And they know when they looked at that, that's what you saw and shot. There's no, did he do this? Did he do that? He didn't crop later on. He was a craftsman. And I don't like the word professional because it's just been, as far as I'm concerned, just driven into the ground. But a photographic craftsman is a person who looks in that viewfinder and says, this is the story I want to tell. And then he uses this lens, he puts himself in that position, changes the f-stop and the exposure, and goes click, and then that craftsman comes out with that product. That pressure of doing that when there was no retakes, there's no redos, there's no anything, and putting it in front of a photo buyer, That's one of the quickest ways to say I'm going to make it or not going to make it, and I need to learn and improve if I want to make it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no cheating it then. And one thing I'm really noticing here, Moose, as we talk, is that you have an incredible sense of focus. Earlier you mentioned that you will spend 12 plus hours sitting and waiting for that shot when you're out in the field. When most people, it's hard for us to sit, or speaking for myself, 12 minutes. And you talk about the incredible focus you have in maintaining your philosophy that's carried you all throughout these decades, starting from, I think you said, the 70s and the 80s. And when you look at today, with all of the challenges and interruptions that come our way, be it the pandemic, that's certainly a challenge, or interruptions, or even just the hottest new trends that start and fade away, how do you maintain your focus? How do you keep your eyes set on the path that you need to go without letting other things interrupt or distract you?
Well, you make it sound like I'm kind of superhuman, and I'm not.
Yes.
I was very fortunate that I had a father who passed on a lot of simple sayings, and one of them was, "You got to work hard if you want to play hard." And I love playing, so it's not that much of a challenge to work hard. But I literally have the camera in my hand every day. It's not, I do it at the very least to make sure I practice my hand holding. But I was out shooting this morning before we got on this call. I was shooting last night, the last bit of twilight. And again, people have to understand I'm incredibly fortunate. It's just at the beginning of this whole pandemic episode, we sold our house and we moved, and it all worked out. So we left the craziness that is California, and we're up at the ranch here in Montana, where it's not that hard just to not be distracted. Now, there's a lot of people out there who love photography, who aren't doing it for a living. They have a 9-to-5 job. They have kids. I remember those days, starting off with, working 60-hour-a-day job and having kids, building the business for, how we describe this process, which I'm still building the business 40 years later. It's not like it's built. If you don't have that passion for the creative process, not just your subject, not just the photograph, but the creative process. And to me, the creative process is everything from doing the testing and experimenting you need to find how you want to solve the problems to tell your story with a camera, to the working hard to buy that gear, and then of course going out and doing that. If you don't have a passion for that, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to succeed. It will show in your photographs. And sadly, I've seen many a photographer put down the camera because their passion just didn't get them through the valleys and back up to the peaks again. Because it's not like it's a level walk. It's an up and down process. At least it has been for my entire career. It's just part of it. You've got to have a passion for that, being a creative and creating that content.
Well, there's a great line from, Steve Jobs gets credit for it and Confucius gets credit for it. And it's that line about, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And that is just so true. So
well, you won't think of it as work, that's for sure.
Right. I mean, it really, if you love what you're doing, but there's also that line that photographers so often forget because they get ground down a little bit, but you can't create images and capture images that tug at people's heartstrings if your own heart isn't in it. And one of the things that I'm seeing right now that's kind of a benefit of the pandemic is that you've got a lot of artists now that have been forced to take a look at, what do I really want to be when I grow up? And what can I do that make my images better? And where am I with that passion? Because you've got downtime now. And there's so many artists out there that are saying, all right, this is a time to expand my skill set. I mean, it doesn't come without lots of pain and loss of revenue and making a change, but it's been forced upon them, where if they had done it on their own, they probably wouldn't have done it and just kept shooting the way they were doing because the checks came in, and left it at that. And it's just kind of neat that right now I'm seeing a lot of passion out there that's caught fire because people have got this downtime. But I want to switch gears for just 1 second, because we're just about out of time anyway. When you're teaching, and I know you've got a program coming up next month with Kelby Media and the online landscape conference, when you're teaching, what seems to be some of the biggest issues for wildlife outdoor photographers right now? Is there a trend of things that they're challenged by the most?
Well, I think it's two-sided. The challenge first comes on my part in sharing in a way that makes sense to folks. And that's one of the biggest things about digital photography is there is a logic that you have to have your own logical flow to make things happen. And that's part of the process of photography. So explaining the logic that I use, so when I go out, the photography process looks so effortless. I need to be able to present that in a way that sinks into the person who's listening it. And the other end, as far as the student, one of the things I think they expect is that all of a sudden the instructor is going to, give them the magic key to the kingdom in this one sentence, and then every photograph from there on is going to be perfect. And most wildlife photographers don't realize that the photographs they're seeing that I'm sharing come from a lot of time in the field. And a lot of the time I go out, I literally get skunked. I don't come back with the photograph, because just because I'm there doesn't mean the critter's going to show up, or the light's going to show up when the critter's there, or the background is going to work when the critter's there with a nice light, or I'm going to have the right lens on when the right critter's there with the right light, with the right back. I mean, so there's so many variables. And one problem that a lot of looking at things online is you see that one photograph. You don't know the backstory to, well, how many times did he go to the refuge to get that picture? How long, did he spend to all that goes into that one click? They just assume, oh, boom, there it is. So all that goes into the process. On the flip side, there's a lot of photographers, and I'm really fortunate and really thankful that come that have already made part of the journey. So when they come to class, they already have their own personal experiences to understand a lot of what I just mentioned. So then they take, and I think this is key for all students, they have to listen to whatever the instructor has to share, and they have to ingest that. And they say, okay, that works for me, and that works for me. And you take that, and you embrace it, you make it yours. And then you have to say, well, that doesn't work for me, and that doesn't work for me, and you have to ignore it. So the student has to know themselves well enough to know where they kind of want to go, to say, yeah, that is mine, embrace that. That is not mine, ignore it. And that's a challenge for both sides, the instructor and the student.
Oh, that's so interesting. And that's such a cool distinction. And you kind of beat me to the punch on our favorite last question that we like to ask. But you know what? I'm going to ask it anyway. Because your insight is so awesome. There are many photographers who are just starting out right now who are listening. What advice would you have for them as they get started on their creative journey?
I could spend an hour with that answering that question, but the number one piece of advice is you have to give yourself time. Photographers do not give themselves time. They don't give themselves time to grow as photographers, grow as a person. I mean, people think that their photograph is only as good as their photographic experience, and that's not how it works. Your photograph is a summation of all your life experiences, with and without a camera. But you have to give yourself time to make that all gel into a single click. Time is the key, and that time, where's it come from? It comes from a passion, right? So, give yourself time is the biggest piece of advice I give all photographers.
Love it. Love it. And I can't believe we're coming up on the end of our time. Speaking of time here, I do want to mention one of the favorite things that you said during this interview. I just want to highlight it. You mentioned that you were constantly building. You were referring to your business and just this constant effort that you put in. And I love that you are ending this interview talking about the concept of time and giving ourselves time and acknowledging the fact that it is really a lifelong process. In our society of instant gratification, we do need to give ourselves permission to take time to constantly build our business, our creativity, our body of work. Moose, you are so inspiring, and I want to make sure and ask one of our most important questions. Where can folks check out your work online?
Well, I'm a big proponent of the KISS theorem. Keep it simple, stupid. So the website is moosepeterson.com, and Twitter, it's Moose Peterson. Facebook, it's Moose Peterson. So you can find me YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, the website. I'm there as much as possible, trying to help and share all that I have been fortunate to learn and has actually sunk in. Now, I only put out those things that I know work, things that basically that explode. I never talk about those failures, but failure is an important part of learning, so it's all in there somehow.
Absolutely. And we will make sure to include those links in the show notes. It's kind of funny that when you mentioned KISS, I thought of the band first. I'm like, how is he going to tie in the band? Of all things. Skip, where can folks find you online?
Oh, you are this is where I realize how much older than I am than you, because I did not go to KISS the band. I went to KISS. Hey, you'll find everything that I do is at skipcohenuniversity.com. You'll also find a lot of things that both Shamira and I do over at platypod.com. My email is skip@mei500.com, and we absolutely invite all our listeners. Give us input, give us feedback, give us suggestions for future podcasts. And on Twitter and Facebook, nothing fancy there. I'm right there with Moose on the KISS theory. And it's just Skip Cohen on both Twitter and Facebook. And as I always ask, all right, Shamira, where do they find you?
Folks can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That is my first name, CHAMIRA@photofocus.com. We love getting questions and ideas and feedback because it absolutely shapes how we move forward with the show and the amazing guests that we have on. And with that said, Moose, thank you again. This has just really been great. Thank you for chatting with us.
Great stuff. I'm so glad we could catch you for a half hour or so here today.
I'm honored to be on the show. It was great, and I appreciate the opportunity, guys. So thank you ever so much.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
You guys stay safe.
Same to you. And we want our listeners to stay safe as well. Stay safe. And thank you for joining us. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they want to level up their photography business moving forward despite the pandemic. We look forward to having you with us next time on Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platypod, Photofocus, and Skip Cohen University.